I'm going to teach you how to read philosophy. I know that sounds weird, but just hang with me. I know some professors who refuse to teach on this. I'm biased, but I'm fair. We're going to be using a piece called The Value of Philosophy. And it's one of my favorite pieces to use, to be honest with you. By the end of this video, you will learn how to read philosophy. And by using this whole piece, you'll not only get that skill, but you'll also learn a little bit about the value of philosophy. Now, let's show you a little bit of my syllabus here. I will often assign this at the beginning of the semester. Right here, you can see like week 2, day 1, week 2, we're already on this value philosophy. This is, for its part, this is in an intro to ethics class. It might seem weird because a lot of students, they will sign up for an ethics class, not realizing that they're signing up also for a philosophy class. I mean, it is apparent that it's, listed Phil 103 or something like that. But they may not see like, okay, well, why are we talking about philosophy if this is an ethics class? What's it got to do with it? You can look at my other video, but you can see here a breakdown, a taxonomy of philosophy, a breakdown of the discipline of philosophy itself. You can see that 3 major subfields: metaphysics, mythology, and axiology. And ethics is properly housed under the discipline of philosophy. It is a subfield of philosophy, subfield. But in any case, when you are doing ethics, that means you're doing philosophy. So even in an intro to ethics class, I will launch the beginning of the semester with this piece. So I think what it says about philosophy in general is also true of ethics. And then I'll also, not just my intro to ethics classes, obviously my intro to philosophy classes, I'll try to fit it in just where possible because I have a really nice short piece. You see on here, only 3 pages, and it's well written. I mean, Bertrand Russell, for his part, he won a Nobel Prize in literature. So he's a very good writer, very good thinker, and it's got some really interesting insights into the nature of philosophy, why we do it, and what good is there to doing philosophy. So I said I would teach you how to read. I know you probably know how to read. If you found this video on YouTube somehow, you know how to read at least a little bit, right? But if you're probably through high school, through college, you know how to read. I don't think you're all idiots, of course, but there are different ways to read something. Of course, the one obvious standard way to read something is kind of front to back, cover to cover. That's one way to read. That's not the only way to read. I will show you real quick. I have a section of my syllabus here where I have a note on reading. I inherited this note from someone else, but it says here, note on reading philosophy. Philosophy reading is often dense and difficult. You'll get the most out of these readings if you give each piece a quick read through first, then slow down and read again, this time carefully with an eye to sorting out the details of the argument. And I know, as I say here, acknowledge it sounds like more time, but really it's probably less, and you'll certainly understand more. So even on day 1, when I'm covering the syllabus, for example, I'll begin by saying, look, I'm not leaving you, hanging you out to dry. We're going to show you how I do this, what this means. And I use the Bertrand Russell reading to show you there are different ways to do it. Now, let's start out with this. So I actually am thinking, as I'm approaching this reading, what do I notice? I notice that it's not that long. It's 3 pages, which is pretty nice. You can see here 1, 2, 3. Okay. That's nice. Now, the first thing I notice about this is the title, right? That value of philosophy. Okay. I know a little bit about what to expect. I know it's going to have to do something about philosophy and probably its value, but then again, the word value can mean several different things. So I know just based on this title alone, what am I gleaning? I'm gleaning some information, but not all the information that I want. Whatever this value word means, because we use it in different senses, right? So like value can mean something like family values or something like that. Like in other words, it means something like virtue. So a family value could be like, fidelity, faithfulness, honesty, truthfulness, that sort of thing. Those are virtues, AKA values. So it could mean something like that. Value could also mean, in a shopping context, that you got a good deal, you got something out of value. So it has different meanings. It's not clear what way, if we're just going upon the title itself, what way in which the author intends to use it. Now let's compare this title to a couple of other titles. All right. So this class is an intro to philosophy class. I have students read a couple of C.S. Lewis's works. I hope to do a couple of videos on these later. But in any case, 3 Parts of Morality. This title, compare this to our title we just saw. This title, it's pretty obvious what I'm supposed to pick up from reading this. I'm not an idiot. I know that by the time, it's very short. By the time I get done reading those 3 pages, I'm supposed to glean from that. Should be able to answer, like, what are these 3 parts? That's an easy, obvious one, but same author, Lewis, Men Without Chest. Now, this is an example of the other end of the spectrum. I have no idea what this means. Sometimes authors are very cutesy and obscure and clever, and they title things kind of real, in deep and profound ways. And so, in fact, in this article, I won't tell you about what it is. Maybe I'll do a video on it later. But in this article, this piece, this phrase appears in the title, but it does not reappear until like the second to last page of the entire reading. So if you're looking for this is a rather long reading, of course, and it reads well. It's very readable. But if I'm looking for that phrase again, I have no idea why this thing is titled this way. I'm left in the dark. I have no idea why I'm reading what I'm reading. I'm really kind of searching. And some authors do that because they want it to be more exploratory. They want to lead you along a certain way and then kind of arrive at a conclusion somehow together. Right? Now, you can see this one is very obvious. I know exactly what I'm looking for and what I should come out with by the time I'm done reading. This one, not so much. Very, very obscure. Our title is kind of somewhere in between there. We kind of have an idea of kind of what we're looking for, but it's not that obvious what we should pick up. So let's continue and let's see. Now, the next thing I would do, this could be step 2. I'm done with the title. Next thing I would do is there's always some kind of helpful, small print kind of excerpt up here. Either it's going to be a précis or an abstract or a summary or something like that. You'll find this in scientific articles and so on. If it's a study or scientific article like on PubMed or NIH or something like that, you can find summaries, it'll go through, what the results, the findings, the summary, the way the study was conducted, and so on. It's the same thing in philosophy writing. You will find a summary. It's called an abstract. In this case, this is not an abstract. This is just kind of random biographical details. So it's still not that helpful. It's interesting. So here you can see that Russell won the Nobel Prize for Literature, which is super cool. But interestingly, he's not well known to have done that. He's not known for literature. I'm not even sure what piece that's for. He's far more well known for his work in philosophy, and that may be one, but philosophy and mathematics and logic. And in fact, he actually has a paradox in logic named after him. It's really quite fascinating. Now, if you've got a paradox named after, it's called the Russell's paradox. If you've got a paradox named after you, you're a big deal when it comes to logic mathematics. So, all that to say that this is not that helpful. Now, he died, and you can see there in 1970. We still have audio of him speaking, and he was rather kind of a posh British sounding man. And so this is, it's fun to see him. He's got debates and stuff on YouTube where you can hear his voice and so on. It's a very bright guy. Yeah. But anyway, this is not that extremely helpful for figuring out what's next. So scratch, we're done. That was step 2. Step 3, on the other hand, all right, got my title, got nothing out of the abstract. Didn't really help me. Next, I'm going to look for subheadings. Now, this is so short that you don't get the subheadings, unfortunately. For better or worse, it's short, it's nice, but no subheadings, no subtitle, no titles or anything like that. We just have the one title. You do, however, in place of having subheadings, you could just read the first line of every paragraph. Like I tell students, why would you go on a trip and not know where you're going? So by seeing what lies ahead, you can figure out, this is not for you as a reader. You have to have a little bit of self-respect. You're being dragged through this journey and you probably want to know where you're going, right? This breakdown is important because as you will learn, throughout your reading career, whatever that looks like for you, you'll realize eventually that authors make really important decisions about what to write, how to structure it, how to order it, and even what order it goes in. They may all say the same thing, but one thing should go first and then the next thing, because that's more, persuasive that way or something. So what to say, how to say it, and so on, and what tone to use, of course. And so you kind of want to be not on your guard, but you kind of want to know what lies ahead so you can have the best understanding you can possibly come away with when you read something. Now, so I won't demonstrate that to you, but that's something you could do. That is the reading of each beginning of each paragraph, but that's something you can do on your own. Now, for this exercise, okay, read the title. Somewhat helpful. This excerpt, this abstract wasn't extremely helpful. And then, of course, if you wanted to read the beginning of every paragraph or the subheadings, if they're there, that's step 3. Step 4 would be to read, just to dive in. And you want to start to see if you can pick up the kind of the spirit of things, the whole rationale, the purpose for the piece in that first paragraph. So let's read this together. Russell says, he starts right off, he says, it will be well to consider what is the value of philosophy and why it ought to be studied. Right there immediately, we have the clue. We have a restatement of the title. That's helpful. And then we have it conjoined with why it ought to be studied. So I know the rationale for this writing. I still don't know what he means by value, though, so I'm going to be on the lookout for that. Now, let's continue. Why not to be studied? He says, the more necessary, we want to consider this right here. It's more necessary to consider this question in view of the fact that many men, under the influence of science or of practical affairs, okay, hold on, let's pause there. Under the influence is not a nice phrase. Under the influence is like under the influence of drugs, under the influence of alcohol. It's not a particularly, very nice phrase to use on someone, especially with science. And that should make you pause. Under the influence of science. Like, what in the heck does he mean? Under the influence, but not just science, but also practical affairs. What would that mean, be under the influence of science? And usually I'll stop here and I'll ask students, we're reading through this, and I'll say, what does that even mean? Right? Under the influence of science. He means something like you are in this certain perspective, and this perspective for you to be from a scientific or practical perspective might not be a good perspective when you are examining whatever it is that our target is, which is philosophy. So in other words, science from the perspective of science or practical affairs, not the best approach when you're examining it from that perspective. You're going to examine philosophy. But let's keep reading what he says. Under the influence of science or practical affairs, many men under those influences are inclined to doubt whether philosophy is anything better than innocent but useless trifling, hair-splitting distinctions and controversies on matters concerning which knowledge is impossible. In other words, just think about this. If you are a philosophy major, or you've been around philosophy majors or minors, if you know people like that, or you could probably just think and imagine things just using like well-known stereotypes of philosophy types or philosophers. If you overhear a conversation of philosophers talking and discussing, this is what it sounds like. It sounds like useless trifling, splitting hairs, and controversies. It doesn't sound like they're really coming to agreement on much because they're just kind of talking in circles. So far, so good. We're through that first paragraph. Now, he says, this view of philosophy, what view of philosophy? What we just read from this perspective of science and practical affairs. This view of philosophy appears to result partly from a wrong conception of the ends of life. Okay, that's very important, but we'll skip it for now. And partly from a wrong conception of the kinds of goods which philosophy strives to achieve. At this point, I want to show you a handout that I have. Now, this handout looks like this. Bertrand Russell Alley Philosophy. I just put the title here. Now, this looks like something real official. Like I would actually use this as a course handout. That's why I call it a handout. This looks superficial, and it is, but it did not start out this way. This literally started out as something just chicken scratch on scrap paper that, and you could do it your own way. Like say, sometimes I will write in the margins of a reading, but I probably originally read this on a digital screen. And so I just chicken scrap note, beside, and then I type it up and it looks very official, but you could do this with anything, right? But I'll go through my rationale of like how I took notes on this. So of course, right here, you see at the very beginning, I'm saying sort of the context of the very rationale for why this reading even exists. And I explained just what Russell told us. Many people think that philosophy is useless or lacks utility. He uses this word utility means something like usefulness. Philosophy is useless. In response, Russell says it really, he acknowledges it does lack utility, but only lacks utility in a certain sense, especially when judged by the standards that other disciplines or sciences are judged by. It doesn't produce technology, so on and so forth, for what it's good for. So it's not going to, philosophy is not going to, it's not going to make you an iPhone. It's not going to build bridges for you. It's not going to, these other disciplines are. So he needs to ask this question, main question here. Question, what is philosophy good for? Like, that is a really important question. It's a really important question because some disciplines, it's really obvious why they're important. Like if I were to go home and tell my parents, I'm studying medicine, I don't have to justify why I'm doing that because it's pretty obvious why it's good, a thing, like why one should study it and so on, because it can help people. And hey, it's pretty lucrative too, because, you can make money doing it. I think here in the state of Maryland, last I checked, just being anesthesiologist, I think you can make something around like $300,000 a year. Of course you don't want to just do it for the money, but it doesn't hurt. It's not going to be like that with philosophy. There's no money in it. And it doesn't produce things. It doesn't seem to be worth anything. And this is often why you will see philosophy departments around the country closing their doors. They're being shut down because they're not producing, let's say, money for the bottom line of the university, right? So it doesn't seem to do the things that its other disciplines are known for doing. So we are left with this question: what is philosophy good for? And as you can see on this handout, I name Russell names, I've counted at least 5 goods of philosophy. And you can think of this as value here. You can think of, if you were to rephrase this, the goods of philosophy. And that would, I think, be a good way to approach this, like the goods of philosophy. He's telling us what philosophy right here, what is it good for? Well, I'm going to tell you what it's good for. Not for the things that you think other things are going to be good for, that other things are good for. It's going to be good in its own way. And I'm going to tell you what those things are. What is it good for, right? That's our central question going forward. Now, if I don't have that down, if I didn't pick up on that, I could still continue to read the rest of this, but I might not fully understand what to expect going forward. It's almost like walking in on a conversation that you walk in on halfway. I can read and understand what's being said here. I understand English. Anybody can do that, but you might not fully understand. You kind of be lost. I'll be like, yeah, okay, that's a good, so on and so on. But if you get this down right here, and it didn't take us long to find. We just read the first 1.5 paragraphs and thought about the title and all that. But if we get this down, the central question, what is philosophy good for? Then we will come away, just like we did with the 3 parts of morality. Okay, I know I'm supposed to be looking for 3 parts of morality. And if I haven't found the 3 parts by then, I need to go back and read and figure them out. We know, once we get this question down, what we are supposed to find in the reading. And that's so important, so central. And then now it becomes just a point of fill in the blank. What is it good for? What's good for this? It's good for that. It's good for that, right? And so that brings us to these 5 goods of philosophy. And the first one is food for the mind. I will show you where in the readings I got these. I picked them up. Okay. So we left off here. This view of philosophy appears to result partly from a wrong conception of the kinds of goods, right there. There it is again, the kinds of goods which philosophy strives to achieve, right? He says here, physical science through medium inventions is useful to numerous people who are wholly ignorant of it. It helps people. It fixes problems. It solves things. Philosophy, unfortunately, doesn't do that. It's not useful in that way. He says, thus, the study of physical science is to be recommended. That is, you probably want your kids studying that, or you probably want university programs to pop up around that. Not only primarily because of the effect on the student, but rather because of the effect on mankind in general. It's super good for everyone. Thus, utility or usefulness does not belong to philosophy. However, it's not, he means utility in a specific way, like usefulness, that is like practical use, as he said up here, or scientific use or something like that. That kind of utility is not going to be the product of philosophy. So what is it good for? Now, the first good that I've identified is food for the mind. And I'll show you where I got that. It's right here. As you can see, right where my red bar is. Food for the mind. Now, philosophy is food for the mind. Now, this sounds super cool, right? It's a slogan. It's a bumper sticker slogan. Philosophy is food for the mind. But what the heck does he mean? Philosophy is food for the mind. Well, it probably means something like you would expect. He means it's nourishing in a particular way to the mind, and it keeps you sharp and so on. And you might think, well, don't all studies do that? Probably, they might all do that, but they're going to do it in different ways. So let's examine kind of what he says further. He says here, and in my notes, I say here, he has this thought experiment Russell imagines, and this is where I'm picking this up. He immediately says this down here. He says, of all men who are well off, poverty and disease, if you see poverty and disease right there, that's where I'm reading. But I'll show you my paraphrase of it. He says, imagine, suppose we had all poverty solved and every basic need met, food, shelter, clothing, etc. What else would we need? Of course, he answers, a lot. We would need all these other things. Now, why does he ask this? Food, shelter, clothing? Because if you go back to the reading, this is the result of this practicality. Practical means something like pragmatic would be a synonym. Practical means of usefulness, of use, and then something that I can put into action, right? These are problem-solving disciplines that he's thinking of, right? Problem-solving disciplines that would solve poverty and disease and so on and so on. He says, though, there would still remain much to be done, right? In this sort of situation, right here, what else does society need? His answer, a lot. In this sort of situation, you're surviving, but you're not thriving. I promise you, if this is all you had, it would be great because no more poverty and disease and so on, but you would be miserable because your mind wouldn't be active. You would be surviving, but you wouldn't be thriving. Now, he says, as I paraphrase here, we still need things to enrich the life of the mind. For example, art, music, and entertainment. Now, why do I pick those? Because those are examples of things that engage the mind. Let's just think of them. Art, music, entertainment. You just imagine think of the things that you really enjoy, the things that you love, music that you really like listening to, on your commute or whatever podcast, or, you like binge watching Netflix or YouTube videos, whatever it may be. All of that requires the engagement of the mind. So, for example, music. The songs you listen to, look, a basic smart animal could enjoy music. A dog or maybe a parrot or something can like bob their head to the music. But humans in particular, they are especially suited to enjoying music in a way because they engage their mind with it. They're able to music evokes memories. It evokes some certain emotions. And if you're really good at your music theory, you can see connections and so on that is not obvious to the naked eye. And you're not using it, obviously. It's not just the simple sensory or physical pleasure of the sound waves hitting your eardrums. Cool, that feels pleasurable. No, it's pleasurable because it's engaging your mind. If you think about, binge watching Netflix, you're not getting pleasure out of that activity because of the light waves hitting your eyes. And then, you suddenly, it's very pleasant. No, you are engaged mentally. You want to see what happens with the story. You want to figure out if it's like a kind of mystery thing or something. You want to see what happens, want to see how it develops. That is engaging your mind. If you think about the opposite of that, like what would happen, for example, if I didn't have mental engagement? Well, all you got to do is ask the question, why do people get bored? Why are humans bored? How does that happen? I would argue that it has to do with a lack of mental engagement. People get bored because they're not mentally engaged. So just think in your history, your life, if you've ever had a job where you were monotonous, doing the same thing over and over and over again, just kind of like a zombie, like maybe like a production line or a line cook or something like that, you're very physically active, but you're kind of dead. And it's very miserable. It's almost torture, because you're not engaged, you're checked out. So that's not pleasant. And a lot of boredom occurs because you're not engaged in what you're seeing or experiencing or something. So it turns out that the life of the mind, all this food for the mind stuff sounds cool and super and deep and all that, but the life of the mind is extremely important for a well-rounded, robust life as a human being, a good life. So that is our first good of philosophy that he's identified. For our second good of philosophy, well, let me say this before I go on. He does say, look, philosophy is one of those that enriches life and mind. He's not going to say that no other discipline does this, because obviously other ones do. Other sciences and disciplines can contribute to providing food for the body and the mind. But philosophy, along with other arts and humanities and so on, is especially suited to providing food for the mind. And it does it in a very particular way. Okay, the next good of philosophy that I've identified is knowledge. So I'll show you where I picked that up. So this is the first page, of course. If we scroll down, right? We just food for the mind right there at the bottom of page 1. If we scroll down to page 2, we see right here at the very top, he says, philosophy, like all other studies, aims primarily at knowledge. Now, cool. But if I'm reading this critically and not just sort of going through the motions and okay, cool. Okay, what am I, right? I should stop and be shocked at that claim. Philosophy, you get knowledge. Because remember what we said just earlier. When you overhear philosophers discussing things, it does not sound like they're coming to agreement on a lot of things. It doesn't sound like they're exploring the world and discovering and finding knowledge, right? Yet, here is Russell saying, no, this is what it does. It gets knowledge. It aims at knowledge. Why wouldn't it, like all other disciplines? Now, obviously, philosophy does not always get knowledge. And this is what I say here. Like all the disciplines, philosophy aim primarily at knowledge, even if it doesn't attain it. We'll see more of this in number 3 as to why. But you can think about, example of this. And I like to ask my students, can you aim at something even if you never achieve that thing? Can it still truly be said of you that you're aiming at that thing? I mean, arguably, an onlooker could just say, no, they're not aiming at that after all. They're never getting it. But you can imagine certain scenarios, and some examples that students come up with are, sports. Sorry about any sports fans, but just think of a team that never wins a championship. Like Cleveland Browns, for example. Sorry to all the Cleveland Browns fans. My priest is a Cleveland Browns fan, and when I use this as an example, he doesn't like it, but he's like, oh, yeah. But Cleveland Browns fans, they always, every season, without fail, aim for the Super Bowl, even though they never attain what they aim at. And you might think, well, maybe not every year. You might think, maybe there are some years, because there are in sports what's called rebuilding years. Right. So maybe maybe not all the time. Maybe they're just sometimes they're aiming at all. But I can guarantee you, even those rebuilding years, those quote rebuilding, if they were to win, I don't know, they can say they're not aiming at it, but if they were to win their first 5 games, let's say, they're not going to be like, guys, chill. Remember, in rebuilding mode, we're not aiming. No, they're going to say, hey, a Super Bowl or bust. And that just kind of underscores and reveals all along what they were aiming for. And it was that they were aiming for the same thing they always aim for, which is the Super Bowl, even though they never get it. So philosophy is kind of like that. Hopefully we're not in as pathetic as a situation as the Cleveland Browns. We do, as we'll see below here, on number 3, we will see below that reasons, we'll see that there are a couple of things that philosophy does actually attain in some areas, some arenas of knowledge. But so we are successful in some kinds, but can't be said much about it that we are. So, all right. Now, let's look at, so I've said a little bit about that. I'll skip a little bit of this, but we look at number 3. I want to show you where I find this uncertainty. Uncertainty is a good thing. And because, we're connecting it to this up here. So I want to just jump down and see number 3, uncertainty. And this aims primarily at knowledge even if it doesn't attain it. This is now our next question. Why? Why? Explain to me why it doesn't attain it. Well, there are a couple of reasons. But first of all, why did I put this in number 3 and not just keep it in number 2? Because I'll show you where I picked this up. So I didn't do this arbitrarily. Remember, I'm teaching you how to read, how to take notes. So obviously, number 2 is at the beginning of page 2, right here, aims primarily at knowledge. Number 3 is at the bottom of page 2, where it says here, the value of philosophy is in fact to be sought largely in its very uncertainty. That's pretty clear. I mean, even if you're counting these differently, it's not just 5 goods, it's maybe some others, maybe less. This is going to be one of them because he repeats the value of philosophy right there. That's the phrase we're after. That's the title of it. And he says largely, to be sought largely. So this is definitely one of the uncertainties, a big one. So that's where I find number 3. However, take a look at this. Our question that becomes why, right? I'm aiming at knowledge. Why don't I ever get it? Okay. Why does philosophy seem, or at least seem to, promote so much uncertainty, or let's say not arrive at knowledge, because these 2 and 3 are connected. And I actually have split this into part A answer and part B answer. And I did not do this arbitrarily, I promise you. I will show you why I did this. And it has to do with, you go back to the reading, everything in between on page 2. Like I said, number 2 was found up here, aims primarily at knowledge. That's a good. And then uncertainty, that's a good. But, well, it's going to be somewhere in between that I find that part A and part B. And again, before I jump in here, what question were we looking at? This question. Why does philosophy promote so much uncertainty? Why doesn't it answer the questions that it tries to ask? Okay. Let me show you what he's doing here. So he says here, if you ask a mathematician, a mineralogist, a historian, any other man of learning, what definite body of truths has been ascertained by his science, he's basically going to talk your ear off. It's going to last as long as you're willing to listen. This is what we mentioned earlier. There's a lot of knowledge and truths to be found in these other sciences. However, he says, if you put the same question to a philosopher, he will, if he's candid, if he's honest, have to confess his study has not achieved positive results, such as have been achieved by the other sciences. So you can rephrase this question that we began with. Why does it promote so much uncertainty? Or why does it not get the positive results? Why does it not get the knowledge, right? These are all rolled into the same question, okay? And he answers this question like so. He says, it is true. Why has it not achieved positive? It is true. This is partly accounted for. So I know that this is part of an answer. And I can skip through. I'll read this, of course. But the other part can be found here in this paragraph. This is only, however, a part of the truth. This would be part B. So you see answers to this, part A and part B, they're not arbitrary. This is going to be one part in that paragraph, that we began with. And the next paragraph, this will be the second part, just like so. So this is what he says in part A, and then I'll go to the actual text. This is how I summarize it. He says here, the question is, why does it promote so much uncertainty? Why don't we get answers? Because the questions that do get definite answers cease to be called philosophy and are absorbed by the other sciences. This is what he says here. It is true, this is partly accounted for. Again, part 1, part of the answer, accounted for by the fact that as soon as definite knowledge concerning any subject becomes possible, this subject ceases to be called philosophy and becomes a separate science. And he comes with receipts. He's not just claiming this and just like not saying anything else. He says the whole study of the heavens, which now belongs to astronomy, was once included in philosophy. So it happened with astronomy, was philosophy, now it's astronomy. He says it also happened with physics because Isaac Newton, the father of physics, right? And then he also says it's happened with psychology, right? It used to be philosophy, now it's psychology. So this is actually my favorite part of the reading. He's arguing that all of these hard and soft sciences that have definite answers used to be philosophy, right? And part of that, you might have a knee-jerk reaction. You might think, well, gosh, that's an easy thing to claim. Of course, you're going to take credit for all the other disciplines and so on. But he's actually right. I mean, you can see his evidence here, but let's just take a look at this example, because he's got one definitive example, Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy, Newton's great work. What is that? Well, if you Google Newton Principia, you can see that it is called, well, let's open the Wikipedia page for it. It is called the Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica. It is called, as Russell himself said, the mathematical principles of natural philosophy. Right here, you can see the translation right here. Isaac Newton, this is the groundbreaking seminal work, magnum opus by Isaac Newton that started the field of physics. Notice that the word physics is nowhere in the title. I mean, you can see that from the English or the Latin. But philosophy is in the title, and it's the very first word, philosophy, right there. This means Isaac Newton did not take himself to be doing physics. He took himself to be doing philosophy, interestingly. Although we don't remember him as a philosopher, that's what he thought of himself as. And this makes sense, right? So like the father of any discipline, the father of any domain or science, in this case, the father of physics, how could you be considering yourself to be doing a discipline that doesn't yet exist, right? If you're the first one to do it and it doesn't exist yet, why would you be doing it? I mean, or thinking that you're doing something that, so of course he took himself to be doing philosophy. We see a really good example here. And if we looked up the other examples that Russell gives, it's the exact same thing. So interestingly, this is one reason why philosophy seems like it doesn't get definite answers, because his answer is, they do get definite answers. We just kind of get robbed of them, of all the credit, because it takes the answers. Oh, we got definite, we'll make our own science. And then boom. And as he says here, thus to a great extent, the uncertainty of philosophy is more apparent than real. We do get definite answers. It just looks like we don't. He says, because those questions which do get definite answers are placed in scientists, while those only at which at present no definite answers can be given remain to form the residue, which is called philosophy. In other words, we are left in philosophy with the questions that are really hard to answer, have no definite answers. And we're kind of left holding the bag of non-definite answers, and get no credit for the stuff that we did get right. But that's only part of the truth. Okay. So let's go back to the notes and see what he says here. Why, again, the question is, to revisit this, why does philosophy seem to pose so much uncertainty? Like I say here, he says more apparent than real. It doesn't actually promote this, or it's not actually all full of non-definite answers, but it seems that way. Why does it seem that way? First, we saw this, and then B, he says, because, as I paraphrase here, we'll look at the actual text in a second, because some questions, many of them of a spiritual nature, are just insoluble, or in other words, unsolvable to the human intellect. Now, this is what he says here. He says, the uncertainty of philosophy. There are many questions, and among them, those that are of the profoundest interest to our spiritual life, which I actually appreciate Russell making this point, because he's not a spiritual person. He's actually an atheist, a very well-known atheist, but he still can give credit where credit's due. And he says, like, a lot of these questions are of a spiritual nature. So he says here, many questions which, so far as we can see, must remain unsolvable to the human intellect, basically, unless we evolve big brains, unless we get, way better powers of intellect. Okay. And he gives some examples of these kinds of questions. He gives 3, just like I gave 3 examples up there. He says, does the universe have any purpose to it, or is it just kind of atoms smashing together? Consciousness, is that a permanent part of the universe? Or is it just an accident on a small planet, and then we're all just going to die in this heat death, unfortunately? We're just kind of here. 3, are good and evil of importance to the whole universe and matter objectively, or are they only important to man? Like, do we just sort of make up good and evil, and that's just important to us? He says, such questions are asked by philosophy, variously answered by various philosophers, but it would seem that, whether answers be otherwise discoverable or not, the answers suggested by philosophy are none of them demonstrably true. None of them are demonstrably true. He did not say none of them are true. Keyword there, demonstrably. What does demonstrably mean? Well, it means, able to demonstrate. It means provable. None of them are provable. Like, he did not say none of them are true. You might have an answer in philosophy that's true, but there's no way to prove it. So the example I give of this in class is, suppose you just flip a coin and you decide you're going to go with like even or odd, right? Imagine the number of stars in the universe, assuming a finite universe, and given any particular time, it's going to be a certain number of stars, and those stars are going to be either even or odd. And let's suppose you flip a coin, you end up with even, and it just so happens that your answer is true. However, there's no possible way you're ever going to know, or let alone be able to demonstrate to others and prove it to them that you have the right answer. It's going to be even. You're just in a situation, you're just out of luck, unfortunately, but you might have the true answer. So he's saying that philosophy might be in this sort of situation. You might have a philosophical theory where you have the correct answer, but it's just, when it comes to persuading anybody of it, demonstrating, and proving it and so on, you're just out of luck, unfortunately. Now, let's go back to this idea here, uncertainty, because it's a little weird, right? He says uncertainty, he means it to be a good thing, right? 5 goods of philosophy. What is it good for, right? That original question, what is it good for? And he says uncertainty. I say here, of course, I paraphrase it as uncertainty is a good thing. And I'll explain this, I guess. You kind of think ahead if you want. Uncertainty is a good thing. You might wonder, okay, why is it a good thing? I can understand that, philosophy, like you could have like a necessary byproduct. Of course, you're going to come across uncertainty and maybe, okay, pain and suffering is a necessary byproduct. You just got to get through it. It's just a kind of accepted fact of the world. Doesn't mean it's a good thing, right? So how is this a good thing? This seems a bad thing if you're uncertain. You don't know anything. So why would this be good? Well, this can be good. Let's think about what uncertainty is, first of all. Uncertainty, of course, means you're not certain, but uncertainty in epistemology, let's think. In epistemology, the study of knowledge, there is what you know, that is your belief, right? And of course, if it's supported by evidence, then that would be your evidence for that belief. So you have what you believe, you have your supporting evidence that supports that belief, but I've not even talked about certainty yet. Certainty is kind of a perspective or attitude out here about your epistemic situation, right? So like you have the belief, you have all the support and evidence for it. And then your certainty would be like, I feel pretty good about, like, I feel pretty confident that I've got it right. Okay. So certainty, in other words, is like a perspective. It's an epistemic perspective or epistemic attitude with respect to your epistemic situation. Now, you could be really certain, really confident, let's say, about your situation, even though your situation's really bad. Let's suppose you have a false belief, or let's suppose you've got really crap evidence, but you're in a really bad, you don't actually know what you're talking about. But you could have like a real confidence and be like, yeah, I'm pretty right about it, right? We know people like this. We know people who are really confidently wrong. They're really humorous when you see them from afar. It's like, that's really funny. They're so wrong. But there's not kind of people that you actually want to have a discussion with. And because it's frustrating to talk to somebody who's obviously wrong, yet really confident about what they believe. So he's saying here, we need a little bit more uncertainty in our life. We need to be shaken out of that situation, because we might be in a situation where our epistemic situation is not that good and we have the wrong belief, or we have bad evidence or something. And so being not as confident about that might be a good thing. And so I say here, it's about the journey, not the destination. I acknowledge and admit this is extremely uncomfortable for a lot of students to think like this, because this is a different way of thinking. It's not the destination. What I mean by that is something like, just give me the answer, right? We discuss, for example, the trolley problem. Very famous. It's now a meme. You see it all over the time, all over the place. If you don't know what the trolley problem is, you probably haven't been on the planet in the last 30 years or something, but it's very famous trolley problem, right? Do I pull the lever and kill only one person and save 5? Or do I do nothing and then let it keep going and then trolley kills 5 people and save 1? So we'll talk about the trolley problem, and students will have a really hearty discussion, usually very lively. Students get into this mindset of thinking, they're like, what is the answer? Every once in a while, I mean, they'll vex over, have a great discussion and everything. And I'll never tell them what the answer is or what I think, but they want to know. They're like, please tell me the answer. This whole destination, like, just tell me what to believe. Philosophy is not like that, unfortunately. And so I say, I acknowledge this is very uncomfortable. Some students are going to be like, yes, give me more of this. I love it. I can understand that because I love philosophy. But a lot of people have like more of a mindset where just tell me, for example, what is the Krebs cycle, so that I can write that down in my notes and then give it back to regurgitate it to you on an exam. And then I guess I can be said to know it, later. But philosophy is not like that. It's not just going to, give you stuff to memorize and then have as facts. I mean, some of that stuff, like a date, maybe in history or a person's name or what they wrote or something like that. And that's minimal details though. The real stuff is this. What I say is about the journey. I mean, we're using a metaphor here, but what I mean by that is, it's going to ask you to think about stuff. Think about why you think about it. Think critically about stuff. Like, science is really good if you're kind of a scientific thinker. Okay, just tell me what the answer is. I can memorize it and so on. But philosophy asks you to step back and think about why that solution would be good, or examine the question itself or so on. So I'll give you an example. I was never really good at mathematics. And it was always because I was confused about like why we were using certain symbols, or, going in the order of operations, like why do it that way, and so I never really got past step one. But that's like a basic step as far as like doing well in math and being really good at it, is like, you just gotta have to buy in. It's almost like sports. Like if you're not bought in, if you're still waiting on the sideline being like, I don't know, it's just like, what, are you sure? You just got to get out there and do it. So, this is why I was not very good at math, because I was always kind of examining. But in philosophy, this is the way things are done, right? And so it is uncomfortable. I acknowledge that. But if you practice this, you can get really good at critical thinking, because I've mentioned this before, but this is what, I mean, you're not just in college to get a job, but it is one of the things you want to get, of course. But employers are not simply interested in people who can tell them answers, right? So if that is your thinking, oh, well, I guess I'm going to get hired because I know what the Krebs cycle is. They could have just Googled that. But they want employers who can think critically about things, who can troubleshoot and problem solve, right? There's always an article that comes out about this, every month or so, it's a dime a dozen at this point. And there was one years back, Mark Cuban, the owner of the Dallas Mavericks, and he was on Shark Tank and so on. He says, I would rather hire a philosophy major than somebody in business or finance or something, because those skills that they learn, they're going to become obsolete in the next 5 years. But philosophy major, I want somebody who is a critical thinker, who can adapt, who knows how to think well, even if they don't know exactly, because they can learn, they can pick up the skills, right? Whereas if you just learn the skills and nothing more, your life is going to be a mess and your career is going to be a mess, because you're not going to know how to adapt. But in any case, I do acknowledge that this is uncomfortable, but I just ask students, just buy in and hang in there, and I'll guide you through it. Okay, one last part here. He says here, where we picked up our number 3, the value philosophy is the fact to be sought largely in its very uncertainty. Good. But then he goes on, he says, the man who has no tincture of philosophy, that's a weird phrase and word, tincture. We never use it, but he means not somebody who's like never had a philosophy class. He means someone who has never thought about the real deep questions in life. Like, why are we here? Where are we going when we die? Those sorts of questions he mentions earlier, right? Does the universe have purpose and so on? The person who's never, it's actually really difficult for me to imagine that there would be people like this, because that sort of thinking comes so naturally to me. But imagine that there are such people. This is what he describes this person as. They go through life imprisoned in the prejudices derived from common sense. You know what prejudice is, but he doesn't mean racial prejudice, but he means something like prejudge. So he's saying prejudge derived from common sense. Now, what does that mean? Prejudices. Okay, here we have again, just like we had on the first page, him saying something bad. And at the beginning, he said, under the influence, and he combines it with something good, under the influence of science. Now he's saying prejudice, something bad, combined with something good, common sense. It's an interesting, like, rhetorical skill he's got there. But prejudices, what does that mean? Well, prejudging using common sense. Again, because think about the person who is confidently wrong. What are they? Is this somebody who's never been reflective in their thinking, never thought, right? And you prejudge situation based on common sense. He doesn't mean common sense in a good way here, as you'll see. He means like, well, everybody knows, such and such and such and such, and you're actually wrong about that or something. Or you go with what everybody believes and everybody is wrong, right? Let me give you an example of this. Did you know, and this example I use in class, you were probably taught this growing up. What is the longest river in the United States? You're probably going to say it's the Mississippi River. Wrong, actually. It's not. It's not the Mississippi River. It's the Missouri River. You can Google that. Fact check me. But we have this sort of, all these common sense things, either cases derived from common sense or from the habitual beliefs of his age or nation. Or, right, what does that mean? Well, you certain ages, certain eras, and they have their own beliefs and things that they just take for granted. It's just obvious. So like 100 years ago in this country, people, for example, thought that it was okay, even a good thing, to sterilize people who they called imbeciles or idiots. People who were mentally unfit, they would sterilize them. They would make it such that they could not reproduce. And they just thought that was an obviously good thing to do. Like that's what you do. Like if you raise objection to that, you'd be weird. Like, but clearly that's just the spirit of the age. They were wrong about that. But you might have something that you grow up with, you kind of just, all these things, he's talking about things that you just kind of inherit, either common sense or habitual beliefs with age, or convictions which are grown up in your mind you inherit them because they're not formed with the cooperation or consent of your deliberate reason. You don't actually believe these things because you've examined them and thought about them. You just kind of inherit them. He says, to such a man, the world tends to become definite, finite, obvious. Common objects rouse no questions, and unfamiliar possibilities are contemptuously rejected. However, as soon as we begin to philosophize on the contrary, we find that even the most everyday things lead to problems to which only very incomplete answers can be given. This is the example I use to my students, number 3, because we're doing it at the beginning of the class, and I usually, read them through the taxonomy of philosophy, and I show them this chart, and we get down here, we talk about metaphysics, we talk about metaphysics deals with the sorts of things that exist. It very often is going to be weird things that, may seem plain and obvious to you at first, like causation, time, free will. And then I get to numbers, things that should obviously cause you no problem. You know what a number is. And then I draw the number 3 on the board. You can see this in one of my short videos or in my video on using this exact chart. Maybe I'll link it up here, but I draw the number 3 and I say, what is this? And they all say number 3. And I say, well, it was the easiest question all semester. And unfortunately got it wrong. It's not the number 3. This is the symbol for the number 3. Because if this is the number 3 and then I go over there and I erase it, I say, if that was the number 3, then I destroy the number 3 and all of mathematics is thrown into chaos. Whoops. That means that can't actually be the number 3, obviously. But that also means what entailed from that is that numbers can't be physical objects. Numbers are not physical objects because physical objects are destructible. And that's not some kind of clever riddle that I'm trying to put forward. As Russell says here, as soon as we begin to philosophize, on the contrary, we find even the most everyday things like numbers, the number 3, lead to problems to which only very incomplete answers can be given. That's what he's describing. He says here, and this will lead us to our number 4, his 4th good. He says, philosophy, though unable to tell us with certainty what is the true answer to the doubts which it raises, is able to suggest many possibilities which enlarge our thoughts and free them from the tyranny of custom. That's really a phrase, tyranny of custom. So he says here, and he says, he moves on to another topic here, apart from utility and showing, but that's what he just described, unsuspected possibilities. He's saying that it has a certain usefulness, philosophy does, in showing us unsuspected possibilities. So, as you see here, that is what I have put for number 4. Another good of philosophy is that it shows us unsuspected possibility. And I say here, especially for the closed-minded man with no tincture of philosophy, like we saw, nobody who's just kind of thought anything about it, not reflected upon anything, developed his beliefs through common sense habits and the worlds around him. Now, so I say here, I'm not sure whether I picked this up for the reading or just kind of added it into my notes. Kind of went rogue on this, but when I teach this, I tell students, look, this is a good process to philosophize. That is, to not be in this situation where you're a man with no tincture of philosophy, but where you examine your beliefs. And I say it's good whether the belief was originally false or true. Now, it's obvious why it would be good if the belief was originally false, because you go through this whole self-reflection, you like examine the belief. If I had a bad belief, if I had a false belief, cool. I figure it out and I update and I correct it, and then I end up with a true belief. Great. But I would argue that this whole process of going through things and examining your beliefs and reflecting upon this is still good, even if that belief originally was true to begin with. And you went through the whole process, and well, it seems like a big waste of time, right? Because you like, why go through that? I had the right belief, the true belief to begin with. So I thought that was for nothing, right? No. And you might think to yourself, pause this video if you want, and think, why would that be a good thing? I mean, because it does seem like a waste of time. And at this point, I would pause here in a lecture, and I'd say, well, why would that be a good thing? You start with the true belief, go through that whole process, end up with the same belief, and you realize it was true. And so you keep it. Cool. Well, the good thing about that is, first of all, it keeps you open-minded because you don't know ahead of time which one of your beliefs is true or false. So the fact that you're going through this process is good. You don't realize that it was a true belief. And it's not a waste of time also because you don't just recognize and realize at the end of the process that your belief was originally true. You now, on this side of things, have really good reasons for why you believe that belief. This is kind of uncomfortable business of philosophy, but I think it's really good and healthy. Aristotle has this quote. He says, it's the mark of an educated man to entertain a thought without accepting it. This is what it means to be educated, to be able to entertain a view. And just because you're thinking in the opposite way of thinking, like, that could be, maybe my belief's false, right? Doesn't mean that you're going to endorse that way of thinking, right? We need actually more of this because, especially in our divisive political world or a divisive religious world, I would love to see more of this rather than people who can't understand the other person's position. Like, you should be able, if you're a good critical thinker, a good philosopher, you should be able to really describe the other view that you're opposed to, the other camp. You should be able to not only describe what they believe, but why they believe it, give good reasons, right? And if you can't, then you're just being tribalistic. You're not actually thinking well, I think. So, for example, like if you're pro-life, you should be able to say why a pro-choicer would be a pro-choicer. I think that's a really important point. Now, that doesn't mean, again, that you're going to accept the other view or accept their arguments or anything like that, but you're putting yourself in the shoes and thinking like they think, and that's just being a good morally good person too. So, not only just a good thinker, you're being a good morally good person. You're being sympathetic, empathetic. Okay, now we've come to number 5, and we're almost done with our reading. So let's take a look at here, and of course he's bracketing that because he's already talking about apart from that. Yeah, okay. He says philosophy has a value. Oh, there it is again. Perhaps its chief value. Oh, so this one's probably the most important. He says, what? Through the greatness of the objects which it contemplates. Okay. Now, what does that mean? The greatness of the objects which it contemplates. Well, let's see what I wrote in my notes. So I say here, for example, the objects that a sports fan contemplates are things like statistics, athletes, teams, players, colors, logos, that sort of thing, right? That's cool. The objects of our attention, if you're a sports fan, right? That's cool to think about those things. The objects of my attention are the things I think about. The objects a philosopher contemplates, however, are going to be much more important, more higher, so and so on. They include the meaning of life, the ground of all reality, and so on. These are going to be a lot more than just sports statistics, right? Now, I think that's unobjectionable and very obvious, right? Now, notice what is being claimed here and notice what's not being claimed. It does not say that a philosopher is more important or higher than a sports athlete. It does not say that the discipline of philosophy is more important than other disciplines. It doesn't say anything like that. It says the objects of attention, the things that a philosopher thinks about, are going to be the most important things that anybody can ever think of. That's the claim here. And I know it feels kind of, this is where they get to that point where like, oh gosh, philosophers sound so arrogant. They always got their nubby little hands, everybody's business, and always trying to tell them what to do about their own disciplines and so on. And they've already got something to say and they think they're better than everybody. This is not what he's saying. He's not saying that philosophers are better. He's not saying the philosophy is better. He's saying that the things that philosophy thinks about are better. And if you just go with that claim, as offensive as it sounds, well, is it true that the meaning of life and the ground of all reality is more important than sports statistics and athletes and so on? And yeah. So this is unobjectionable. So now here's another important point. He doesn't say this, but he does not say that only a philosopher can think about these things. This is entailed from the way he describes it. He says, this is the objects which are great, not just it's the business of philosophy. Only you kind of gatekeeping, nobody else can do this. No. Anybody can think about these things. Anybody. And so anybody can think about these things, which are the greatest things to think about. So he's not taking any claims to philosophy as being better than any other discipline, but it only gets that status of being better not because of the people or the way we teach or because of the things that we think about and the things that we teach. And it's very, very necessary. So I say here, again, it's the questions themselves. See number 3, things like this, like some questions, many of the spiritual nature are just unsolvable in human intellect. The content of the discipline of philosophy, which is important here. I say here, is contemplation, Russell says, leads to freedom from narrow and personal aims. You're not just shackled in that common sense thinking or the mindset of the age or era that you're in. So, yeah. So to finish out here, it says, thus, to sum up our discussion, and this is something you could probably add at the end of your notes, but I guess I ran out of room or whatever, paper space or something like that. I just got my 5 things and went with it. But here, so he says, to sum up our discussion, you could probably add this to the end. The value of philosophy. Philosophy is to be studied. There it is again, the value of philosophy. And it's conjoined with the philosophy ought to be studied. Why it ought to be studied was what he said on the first page. This is what he says on the last page. Now, he says, not for the sake of any definite answers to its questions, since no definite answers can, as a rule, be known to be true. Now, I would disagree with this with Russell. We do have definite answers that can be known to be true, but a lot of them are going to be kind of left over. We've been doing philosophy for a long time, 3,000 or so years. So made a lot of progress and we're kind of left over with the residues, he said. So it may look like that now, but I still think you can find definite answers and that they can be known to be true. But in any case, that's just a quibble there. He says, not for the sake of any definite answers, but rather for the sake of the questions themselves, because these questions enlarge the conception of what's possible, enrich our intellectual imagination, and diminish the dogmatic assurance. This is that kind of closed-minded, confidently wrong attitude, dogmatic assurance, which closes the mind against speculation, above all because through the greatness of the universe which philosophy contemplates, the mind also is rendered great. It becomes capable of the union, that universe. I don't like this. This is him being an atheist. If you were a theist, you would say capable of that union, not with the universe. Why would you union with the universe? What would that mean? Anyway, you're just talking gobbledygook at that point. But you're talking about union with your creator, who made you and made you to think about these sorts of great things. But in any case, that's philosophical disagreement again. So in any case, that is all. Of course, if you're not subscribed, let this be a reminder from my wife to make sure you subscribe. And I look forward to hearing from you next time. Take care.